I do want to mention one interesting instance where someone had the best keywords and had, was right in the right amount of experience that we wanted, the right degrees, right school. But one of their jobs that they had written on their resume, they said they were working on a kind of scientific data that we were looking for. But when I looked at the company that they did this, it was a convenience store. And I thought to myself, I joked, I said, I'm pretty sure 7-Eleven does not do genomics data.
Right. Hello, and welcome back to Higher We Go, where every episode we sit down with someone in the TA trenches and walk you through how to tackle one real challenge step by step. I'm Ashley Collins, and today my guest is Daniela Sharma. Thank you so much for being here today. I'd love if we could kick things off with you telling us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Ashley. Pleasure to be here. And I appreciate the invitation. Give you a real high level, overview about, my career. I actually started out as a scientist and was in a university system for a long time, including being a professor, and had some career change and most recently worked on, recruiting for biotech companies, and did some high volume, clinical recruiting. And most recently did some really cutting edge scientific and machine learning recruiting in a very interesting organization, out in California. So I got a good view about different types of recruiting, and I love using my science knowledge and the knowledge that I've learned from working in these different roles to help really find that sometimes hard to find talent, or sometimes you can find them, but it's very competitive talent. To help the hiring teams, get the best matches for themselves.
Oh, that's amazing. And it's not every day that we have a PhD on Higher We Go. So I would absolutely love to hear more about your hands-on experience leveraging AI to find real humans, both at the top of the funnel when they're still candidates and applicants, and also as a sourcer.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I really focused on my latest role. I think my role was really focusing on most of top of the funnel and all the workflows that are related to that, including job descriptions and so forth. So we had an interesting situation where our organization newly experienced a challenge where a role it had almost close to 1,000 applicants within a short amount of time, and it was a smaller organization, and we thought it was a niche role, but apparently not. So we had to really sit down. I had to sit down as the main sourcer and top of the funnel reviewer to say, what is happening. So my first thought was I'll use my Boolean searches. So we have a wonderful ATS, and I'll use a ranking system with an internal AI, tool. And I realized that using keywords, if our AI, tools can look at that, that means the person who is applying can also use that. And first I had I was a little, challenged by that, but I said, that makes sense. If we're using AI, of course, other people are going to be using it as well. And it all goes down back to the job description. If you put in very general information, you're going to get very general resumes, GIGO. And I think that using some more boutique or niche terms helped us. And as we got the volume down a bit, we also looked at some impact that people had, not just keywords, not just descriptors of what they've done, but the impact that they had. And that just wasn't just metrics, but also looking at their career progression, or maybe the different types of projects they worked on, different organizations they may have been involved with, different conferences that they may have presented at or attended, and some projects, or even, if it was more scientific, some articles that they have written, basically really looking at the impact they would have as a real life person, rather than a collection of keywords. So that really helped us narrow it down. But I do want to mention one interesting instance where someone had the best keywords and had, was right in the right, amount of experience that we wanted, the right degrees, right school. But one of their jobs that they had written on their resume, they said they were working on a kind of scientific data that we were looking for. But when I looked at the company that they did this, it was a convenience store. And I thought to myself, I joked, I said, I'm pretty sure 7-Eleven does not do genomics data.
Right.
But I reached out to my colleague and I said, what do you think about this? And they said, I've never heard of this before. So this was an interesting check that a Boolean search or even our AI tool would not necessarily pick up because they don't know 7-Eleven doesn't do genomic data research.
Yeah. And you mentioned something earlier that I'd like to double click on if you don't mind. And that was, the keywords that go into your job ad copy. Were there any tools or best practices that you used to analyze your job ad copy and really shift that to using more of those niche keywords? Like how did you make that transition?
One of the first things we do is we work closely with the hiring manager or managers to really understand what are some of the skills that they need from day one.
Yeah,
we don't have the ability to train on this. We need the person to have this demonstrated skill or set of skills from day one. We also want to make sure that we understand, the level of experience, any other background information that they need to have in terms of maybe, the type of education that they had, degree, or some of the projects that they worked on, types of projects that they worked on. And then, we would craft a job description. We would try to reduce the amount of like nice to haves, like, you don't need to have this, but it would be great if you did, because between people writing their resume and us evaluating using AI tools, that seems to not generate the types of results that we think it would be, and might introduce some interesting biases or misses for some interesting candidates. So if we really want something, we'll put it up to the requirements or needs for the job, that seems to help a lot. Then we would actually use our own AI tools to review the job description, make sure we're not using those general terms or terms that do introduce bias and you wouldn't think that it would. Something like, and I see this right now as I'm looking at some job listings, something like, we need a rock star. I'm like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, I play piano, but I don't know if I'm a rock star.
Rock star.
Yeah.
Ninjas and gurus are floating around.
Exactly. Something like that. And it's interesting because we didn't face these sort of issues with respect to, AI and resumes, or even AI and us as talent reviewing them, I would say even 6 months ago. So the information and the amount of data that's being used to evaluate job descriptions and people matching their resumes using AI has evolved significantly. So it's going to be a constant review of what we're using as our tools. And also we would do sort of like test cases in terms of like we would make mock-up resumes and put it into our AI review and do it repeatedly, because I know some people have mentioned that if you've used different resumes on different days, it would evaluate and rank differently. So we need to know why that happens. But there's a lot you can do ahead of time, especially from the job description. And I always like to say, no job is an island, meaning that's my very poetic saying, meaning that even though you're hiring for a particular job, that person most of the time has to interact with other people, other job titles. Yeah. So how does that fit into, so you can really find the best candidate, but also ask the hiring manager, who do you really need? And what do they need to have, demonstrate in terms of their skill set? And it's not just the job description, it's also how they're interacting with the team and others.
Yeah, that's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your experience, your insights, and hopefully there is something that our listeners can bring into their day to day and moving forward to make their work life just that little bit easier. So thank you all for tuning in, and until next time.
Thank you very much.